Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Well, it's not who's in charge, but the prospect of gridlock at the borders after Brexit that's worrying business. Sky News has seen some secret contingency plans drawn up by those advising the government to stop lorries being stopped as they make their way into the UK from the EU. Our business correspondent Adam Parsons reports.
British business depends on this: goods coming in and out of ports. A complex operation, a mass of international agreements. Whatever happens with Brexit will be felt here. The fear is that new customs checks could lead to this: gridlocked roads and expensive delays. Sky News has seen documents from the influential Joint Customs Consultative Committee, which scrutinises trade regulations, calling for urgent work to prevent lorries being stopped at the border. Instead, they would drive to new customs areas built away from ports. The committee also suggests there may be no option but to persist with present rules about the Irish border. Today, one of the committee's members told me that what he desperately wanted was clarity.
The question is, when are you going to pull the pin? How long are we going to wait? Is it going to be October? Is it going to be December? Is it going to be the 30th of March? That's the issue. So at some point, somebody's got to make a decision. Do you know what? This isn't going to work. We're going to have nothing conciliatory going on. We're going to have to start implementing this stuff.
And when do you need to know?
Well, I would say a minimum of 6 months.
Well, in politics, brinkmanship is a pretty popular tactic, taking your negotiations right up to the last minute. But that approach isn't nearly so popular in British business. There, the call is for action now, for greater clarity. And the complaint is that clarity is exactly what they don't have. The British Chambers of Commerce has analysed 24 different challenges that British business will face during Brexit. They get a traffic light rating, green, red or amber, and here's the conclusion: no greens, a couple of ambers for slight progress, and the rest all red. This is a picture of business anxiety.
It's not harsh at all to point out that they don't yet have that clarity. The reason why our risk register shows so many issues glowing red is because the negotiations haven't concluded on those issues, nor have the two sides given businesses enough assurance that they're close to a deal.
Hi Anna, it's Sally at the pencil case.
In South Wales, Sally is making plans for her stationery shop.
This is a range that I source from Germany, predominantly. There's some elements from France as well.
She worries that a no-deal Brexit will make it harder to get the stock she needs.
Our contingency plans are going to be to have to hold more stock here, which obviously means a lot of cash is tied up in stock that's just sat there doing nothing, in order to make sure that we've got stock all the time. If we get to a position where stock gets stuck in the supply chain and we can't get it in, then obviously we'll end up losing sales because the stock's not physically here.
For many in British business, the prospect of a Brexit that comes with no trade deal is now focusing attention on planning for an uncertain future. Adam Parsons, Sky News.
As if the Prime Minister didn't have enough trouble with Brexit, she'll have a slightly smaller majority to cope with in September. The DUP's Ian Paisley has been suspended from Parliament for 30 sitting days and had his pay withdrawn for a month. The Northern Ireland MP failed to declare luxury holidays that were funded by the Sri Lankan government.
It sounds a bit like a survival guide from a disaster movie, but today it came from the mouths of senior members of the Cabinet. The Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, confirmed to a Parliamentary Select Committee industry plans to stockpile medicine and blood products in the event of a no-deal Brexit. A little earlier, you will have heard the Brexit Secretary himself, Dominic Raab, once again refusing to rule out the stockpiling of food, only saying that it wasn't being done by the government. So is this an attempt to prepare us or to scare us? What's behind the concerted effort? To tell us all this, well, we'll ask Sarah Wollaston, chair of the Health Select Committee, for her take in a moment. First, our political editor, Nick Watt, is here just Talk us through what they said, Nick.
Well, Theresa May said at the end of that Chequers meeting that the government would be stepping up its no-deal preparations and would be explaining to the British people what that means. And today, on the final day of Parliament before the summer recess, those two interventions by those two cabinet ministers. Now, Matt Hancock, the Health and Social Care Secretary, he told Sarah's committee that he was very confident that there would be a deal with the European Union. But if there isn't a deal, there need to be preparations. And this is what he said.
We're working right across government to ensure that the health sector and the industry are prepared and that people's health will be safeguarded in the event of a no-deal Brexit. And this includes the chain of medical supplies, as you mentioned, vaccines, medical devices, clinical consumables, blood products, and I've asked the department to work up options for stockpiling by industry, and we are working with industry to prepare for the potential need for stockpiling in the event of a no-deal Brexit. This is exactly the type of contingency planning you'd expect us to be doing.
And how? So there were those wide examples there from Matt Hancock, but there are some specific examples in a report recently done by Sarah Wollaston's committee. It talks, for example, that the strategy for mitigating Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease involves importing plasma from the United States, but also from Austria. And there are concerns that in the event of no deal, there may be problems with that supply from Austria. But also, as you were saying, Dominic Raab, the Brexit secretary, he was in front of the Brexit committee, and he was asked about these reports that there are going to be plans for stockpiling of food. This is what he said.
Is the government considering stockpiling food?
Again, I will set this out we will set this out in the technical notices, but I think it would be wrong to describe it as the government doing the stockpiling. What we will make sure, and of course the idea that we only get food imports into this country from one continent is not appropriate, but we will look at this issue in the round and make sure that there's adequate food supply as well as all of these other things. Again, I'm not going to give more detail until I can set it out in a responsible and full fashion.
It can't be a coincidence, Nick, that you have both cabinet secretaries on the same day saying not dissimilar things. What is this all about now?
Well, talking on the same theme, but actually with quite a different tone from two cabinet ministers who were on either side. So Matt Hancock, who was on the Remain side, giving those very clear warnings, and Dom Raab, who was on the Leave side, sounding much more equivocal. Now, at one level, there's a very simple explanation for that. There are some very clear and straightforward preparations that are going on in the NHS, and Matt Hancock is talking about them. On food, the view in the Brexit department is the preparations are a bit more complicated. It may not necessarily be stockpiling by the industry. It may be better forms of communications, which explains why Dom Raab was sounding a little more equivocal. But there is a political dimension here. There are Brexiteers who want the warnings about no deal not so much to resonate here in the UK, but in Brussels. We're not scared of a no deal. And there are some Remainers who want, in the words of one Theresa May supporter to me this afternoon, we want to scare people witless, this person said to me, this Tory said to me, so that people will eventually embrace the Theresa May plan. Important to say, that's not the Matt Hancock view. He simply says, I'm doing my job and I'm saying what my department's doing. Nothing really political is his view.
Nick, thanks very much indeed. Well, Sarah Wollaston's with me now, Chair of the Health Select Committee, and it was, of course, your committee that heard from Matt Hancock this afternoon. I'm wondering whether you were actually relieved to hear him enunciate that, or whether you were as shocked as many of us here will have been.
We've been calling for some time for the government to set out the full consequences of no deal, because we tend to talk about those in terms of things like WTO and tariffs, but in fact the consequences are far more serious for health, right through the whole life cycle of a medicine, for example, through research, access to clinical trials, safe manufacture, how the batches are tested, right through to the timely arrival of those products on the pharmacy shelf. So this is really serious, and it's not just about stockpiling here. There are some products that can't be stockpiled. Around 700,000 diagnostic tests every year in the NHS require medical radioisotopes, and these have very short shelf lives. They can't be stockpiled and they're not manufactured here. So the whole issue around supply chains is really important.
Then? I mean, if they can't be stockpiled and they're not manufactured here, what are you What are you envisaging?
Well, what we're suggesting is that the Secretary of State needs to set out very clearly the full range of the issues that we will encounter in the event of no deal and what is going to be done to mitigate that, and also what the costs will be, because those costs are assumed to be borne by industry at the moment, but they'll be passed on to the NHS. So we need to have a clear idea about what the risks are, what's being done to mitigate it, and what the costs will be of that.
Nick was mentioning CJD. I wonder if you can spell out to our viewers how dependent we are at the moment on the EU for this. I mean, how many people do you actually think would be affected by this?
Well, I think this is what the government needs to set out very clearly, because although there are other sources, we need to be planning in advance for how we could step up obtaining those supplies from elsewhere if need be. He talked today about some supplies being flown in, but we still end up with the issues around custom checks and how they're going to be facilitated across the border, particularly items which have very short shelf lives.
But the EU would never let it get that bad. The EU would never let it get to a place where British citizens were dying because of a hold-up in the airspace, right?
Well, one would hope not, but we need to be very clear that there could be potential problems here, and you need to plan for that in advance, exactly what's going to happen. We all want to see a deal reached out. We want to see close regulatory alignment, for example, with the European Union to deal with many of these issues. And remember, this isn't just about medicines. If, for example, you suffer with a serious long-term condition and you're thinking of booking a holiday next year, you have to factor in that in the event of no deal, you won't have a European health insurance card, and you'll be falling back on private insurance, which will be more expensive because of the lack of the EHIC card, which provides part of the cover. But in some cases, you might be uninsurable to travel. So all of these kinds of things, we want the government to set out the full issues for health and the costs, to publish that in full, not to scare people, but to make people aware of what the consequences are, and so that we can hold them to account for planning in advance for some of these scenarios.
Sarah, you know very well that what you're saying will play into the hands of people who say, well, she would say that, wouldn't she? You know, made no secret of her belief in the terror, if you like, of Brexit. You come from, you know, a health background clearly, and that this is being overplayed. This is being over-dramatised because it helps the Remainers, the second voters, to make their point.
No, this has been there for some time. We've just set out, and we heard evidence. People are very welcome to look at the evidence we received, and it was almost unanimous in warning about the consequences of no deal and the need for contingency planning. So yes, everyone's welcome to look at the report, but also to look at the evidence that underpinned it, because it's very powerful indeed. And so I'm very relieved that the Secretary of State actually said that they are getting on with that contingency planning. My point is that they need to make that clear to the public as well.
Sarah Wilson, thanks very much indeed. Nick, what are Brexiteers going to be saying to this evening? It's pretty unhelpful for them, is it?
Well, there's a very strong response. I spoke to one source in the European Research Group, that's the main Brexit group, and they are saying Matt Hancock's remarks this afternoon were weaponising the no-deal preparations. Now, they're saying, at long last, the government is making no-deal preparations. Brexit ministers have been very critical of the Chancellor for not getting going on this earlier, from withholding money. At last, they say, those preparations are underway. But the ERG sources are saying what we're hearing today. They're saying this is Project Fear 2.0. Obviously, Project Fear was their description for all the warnings that were issued by George Osborne, who, of course, was Matt Hancock's great patron in the referendum campaign. And they're saying what they're hearing this afternoon is very cynical. It is important to say that Matt Hancock's view is he is very simply and in a very straightforward way explaining the plans in his department. There was no political motive behind what he was saying, his department say.
Well,